once you're finished with your design in Affinity Designer, if you go to File, Export, and then click at the top on EPS, you can see in Affinity's presets that there's loads of options to pick from, including PSD, which is quite impressive. You've really got 3 options out of that preset menu. You've got PSD, SVG and EPS, all of which will be able to be imported into After Effects. So if you'd like to follow along with what I'm doing, you can go to EPS, Digital High Quality, Export, save it, and then it will be ready for you to import into After Effects. So if you double click on the project panel and select the EPS file, go to Import as Composition. I like to tick Retain Layer Sizes and Create Composition, and then click Open. Double click on the composition, and then you'll be able to see below that everything's collected in one file, but you can right click, then go to Create Shapes from Vector Layer, and then all the contents will be collected into groups. So the best way to separate these groups is to duplicate the object and figure out which parts lay in which groups. So if you do your duplicates and then start labeling them up, you'll be able to go back through them and basically click down into the different groups. Okay, so I'm going through the groups here, and just by highlighting them you'll be able to see which group corresponds to which object. So I've gone through and deleted the first set. You can also use the solo tool to be able to do this. There we go. So that's the S separated. Then dropping back down, contents, deleting all the text that I don't need, and then figuring out which is the next letter to grab, and it's that S, and using the solo tool there to toggle on and off. Then back again. Deleted those, and then we're grabbing the T there. So the 2 S's behind have gone. And then the last one is the play button, so just deleting all of those letters again. Okay, so that's all of your objects separated. The other thing you can do is solo or use the eye to make sure that everything you want in those separate layers is in there. Another thing to point out is that the anchor tool isn't centered naturally when you do this. So you right click it, transform, center anchor point in layer content, and do this for everything because it's best to start out that way. Even though depending on the type of animation you want to do, the anchor point can change, but I find it's always better to start with the anchor point in the middle. And there we go. When we scales from the middle. And that's it. So jumping into Affinity Designer, I think one of the pros from importing from Affinity is that when you add new objects, it creates its own separate layer. Sometimes when you do this in Adobe Illustrator, all of the different text, objects, etc. collect into one layer, whereas in Affinity, all of the text, all of the objects are labelled, as well as being separated into their own layers, which is very handy. The only downside to this when you're importing it into After Effects is that you need to do the organising that you would usually do in Illustrator in After Effects. So whilst it's good for things like logo animation or things without too many different moving parts, if you were to do a character, for example, that would take a lot longer to organise in After Effects than it would just in Adobe Illustrator, for example. But it's good that Affinity Designer is a low-cost program and it's usable still in After Effects. And also this document, for example, could actually be imported into Adobe Illustrator, which I know they're competitor programs, but if you were like working for a client, for example, who had access to Illustrator, you could do your first base designs in Affinity and then do your organising in Illustrator if you wanted to do, like, for example, an explainer video with a lot of moving parts. So there are a lot of possibilities for Affinity. I'm actually quite impressed with this software. It's a very good alternative to Adobe Illustrator. Even just looking at the amount of shape options you have available that you'd have to create in Adobe Illustrator, it's very impressive. Just to run through once again of how to export to be able to animate your logo or object that you've created in Affinity Designer. At the top, you've got all of your drop-down presets. SVG, PSD or EPS will give you the option of animating separate layers in After Effects. I've done EPS Digital High Quality. SVG would be very similar to this, and equally PSD will probably be my third option. Export, save where you need to save it, and then it's ready. The last big pro I wanted to shout out for Affinity Designer is the way of picking colours. The stroke and fill options there that I'm highlighting are pretty similar to Adobe Illustrator, which is really impressive, but I found picking colours in Illustrator to be a little bit kind of clunky at times, whereas if you just select the objects here, you're able to see the stroke and the fill options similar to the properties tab in Illustrator. But this colour wheel, I haven't really seen it in Adobe software before. It just seems like a very cool and interactive way of picking colours, and you can see the hex code kind of changing as you pick it, so it's easy for you to kind of copy and paste that. Just wanted to highlight this, as I think it's a cool way and a bit of an easier way of picking colours. And just to show you what this file would look like if you opened it inside Adobe Illustrator, just from clicking that EPS file, this has opened up, and as you can see there's just one layer, and everything that you can see on the screen there is grouped on the inside of that layer. So what you can do is you can click into the group and then select the parts that you want, for example, and then group them, which I've done there for the text on the side, and then I've gone into create more layers, and now I'm labeling them just so that you know which is which, because all of these namings will be coming up into After Effects once this has been imported into After Effects. Okay, just checking that I've got all of the different layers. Dragging and dropping all of the different objects into the layer that corresponds with the naming. Okay, and then toggling on and off to make sure that everything is where it should be before importing it into After Effects. Okay, that looks good. So I'm going to save this as an Illustrator file, and now I'm importing the Illustrator file into After Effects. Import as composition, retain layer sizes, and then tick create composition. This is very important. And then click open. Double click on the composition, and you'll see that everything has its own layer as you've organised it in Adobe Illustrator. So yeah, just clicking through all the different layers, and then if you select those, right click, create shapes from vector layer. Everything will now be a vector shape within After Effects. So you can select the label group for the original layers and delete them, or you could hide them. I always like to delete them. Yeah, just checking that all of the layers are there. And the good thing about this is that when you have separated layers and import them from Adobe Illustrator, the layer, if you have it toggled on, the anchor point is already centered in the object. So it just removes an extra step really, which can save time when you're working with a file that has multiple layers. So yeah, I would say that this is a bit more straightforward. But there's also the additional step of sorting, so whether you're using Affinity or Adobe Illustrator, at some point you are going to have to organise your layers. It's very good that in this process that you can sort it out before it gets into After Effects, because in a design program you're better placed to know what goes where really. But also what I like about Affinity is that it removes this step, which I'm showing now. So obviously when you go into Adobe Illustrator and you start playing around with the different kind of text layers and objects that you want to add in. Everything collects into that one layer. In Affinity it doesn't do this, it creates its own separate layers, and you don't have to label it, because for example if you had the S or if you had the T, it would just show up as ST in your layer panel. Whereas in Adobe Illustrator, unless you physically create a new layer every time you create a new object, then everything is going to collect into that one layer, and then you're going to have to go back and organise it. A slightly easier way of doing this is also to drop down the layer and then select all the objects within your layer, and then go to the options menu on the right hand side and then click release to layers, and then just take all of those layers out of your original layer and then label them that way. This saves some time, but it still can be a bit of a lengthy process, especially when it's a big project.